Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. This is Congressman Mike Levin, and you are now tuned in to the 43rd virtual town hall that we've held since the middle of March, since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm so grateful that you're here, whether you're watching on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. Thanks for spending some of your Saturday afternoon with us. I want to thank our amazing staff, as always, for putting this together. Our great campaign team, and also Jeremy for helping out with the live stream today, as always. And I'd like to begin this week by paying tribute to Associate Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who passed away on September 18th. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to attend her services in Statuary Hall. She was the first woman and first Jewish American to be there lying in state in Statuary Hall. Really a remarkable career. And one of the quotes that I thought was very poignant from yesterday, every family in America benefited from her brilliant legacy and courage. Over the course of her quarter century as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg became an icon, inspiring people around the world with her tenacity, towering intellect, and devotion to the American promise of equality and opportunity for all. Her tireless advocacy in the fight for gender equality, whether working at the ACLU, arguing cases before the Supreme Court, or authoring thoughtful and historic opinions and dissents as an Associate Justice, leaves an enduring legacy of progress for all women. Her opinions have unequivocally cemented the precedent that all men and women are created equal. We must honor Justice Ginsburg's trailblazing career and safeguard her powerful legacy by ensuring that the next Associate Justice of the Supreme Court upholds her commitment to equality, opportunity, and justice for all. And my mom, who I think is watching this right now, painted an amazing painting. She's a great artist, and she painted this amazing painting of Justice Ginsburg recently, I think last year, as a matter of fact, and I thought that I would show it to you. But just a very emotional day yesterday in the Capitol. And we'll all be thinking of her and her family and her legacy, and hoping that we can do our part to live up to her legacy in the months and the years ahead. And it's a very difficult time. Obviously, we're going to go through a confirmation process now with Amy Coney Barrett, who we heard from earlier today. She has dramatically different views, a dramatically different approach to how she would approach her seat on the court. I know all of that will be discussed thoroughly in the coming weeks, but I think it's important that we focus on some of the major decisions that she may impact, such as the Affordable Care Act. Healthcare will be before the court November 10th. We're talking about protections for pre-existing conditions for 130 million Americans. We're talking about 20 million Americans who have their health insurance as a result of the Affordable Care Act, including 47,000 in our district alone. But so much else on the table at stake right now: reproductive rights, LGBTQ equality, everything from environmental protection, clean air and water, and being able to protect against emissions. Pretty much everything that we care about is at stake. And I know that will be discussed in the coming days and weeks. But for now, we honor the legacy of a truly great American, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It wasn't a quiet week for so many reasons. There were actually a number of things that happened legislatively that I'd like to update you on before we get to our excellent guests this week. One is we passed what's called a continuing resolution. Very important that we keep the government funded. Particularly in the middle of a pandemic. You know, when I started in January of 2019, we had the longest government shutdown in our nation's history, 35 days, and I saw the impact that that had on our community, on all the employees that work for everything from Fish and Wildlife Service to our air traffic controllers. So we wanted to do everything we could to avoid another government shutdown, and we did. Passed a short-term continuing resolution until December the 11th. So we'll have to go back in December, and we'll have to negotiate, hopefully, a longer-term agreement to fund the government. But it's important that we got that done. Also, a couple of bills that I've been working on that we were able to get across the finish line this past week. Many of you know, if you've tuned in before, that I chair a subcommittee on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and I've been working now on many initiatives in a bipartisan way. I'm really honored that this past week we passed the DELIVER Act, Dependable Employment and Living Improvements for Veterans Economic Recovery, fun acronym, DELIVER. But this is a package of 10 bills, 6 of which I authored. 5 of those 6 are truly bipartisan in nature. Actually, all 6 are bipartisan, but 5 of them I co-led with a Republican, and that includes Kevin McCarthy. I worked with the minority leader on a bill that would provide greater flexibility for use of HUD-BASH vouchers for our veterans, particularly in a place like San Diego, where a third of those vouchers are not being utilized. This would provide some flexibility of how we could make sure that they're all being used. And also working with Dr. Phil Rowe of Tennessee, who's the ranking member on House Veterans Affairs, a rapid retraining program for our veterans, those who are out of work right now. Really stunning to see the number who are out of work or at risk in terms of their housing or food insecurity, just a real tragedy with regard to our veteran community. And so the DELIVER Act really tries to address that. Also has a provision that I worked on with my friend Jody Arrington from Texas to deal with transition assistance, named after a high school friend of Jody's who tragically took his own life after service in Iraq. So even at a time when things are, sometimes very partisan, the House Veterans Affairs Committee is a place where we come together and we get things done on behalf of those who served our country. And I'm very, very excited about the DELIVER Act, not only because it passed the House, but also it's bicameral, bipartisan. It has a great shot of passing the Senate and becoming law this year and helping veterans, in the near term as they need that help. This would be the 5th veterans bill that I led or co-led that has become law. Four others have become law this Congress. And so we are getting things done for our veterans, and I'm very proud of that. The other thing that passed this week that I'll mention is the Clean Economy, Jobs, and Innovation Act. And I bring that up. It's a package largely of things like research and development to help accelerate clean energy. And it includes a number of provisions that I specifically led. One of them is a $500 million effort for research and development into spent nuclear fuel. This is so important, of course, with San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station in our district. And it was informed, this particular effort was informed by the work of our task force. For those that haven't seen, we created a task force that came out with this report. It was co-chaired by the former head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and a retired Navy admiral, with the objective of getting the nuclear waste off our beautiful California coast as quickly and as safely as we can. A number of recommendations in there we've already acted on. One of them, research and development for spent nuclear fuel. So $500 million included in the bill. Another $100 million research initiative for wildfire smoke. Obviously, we've gone through tragic wildfires throughout California in recent weeks. We just recently, all you had to do is look out your window and see and smell the smoke, or look at your car, covered in ash. So the $100 million would go to study the impact on our public health, something that we really don't know as much about as we should, particularly on children and others who are at risk. One of the things that I know they're going to study that UC San Diego is leading on is the link to COVID-19, and specifically the greater impact of COVID-19, the severity of symptoms and the potential for death for those who are exposed to wildfire smoke. 3.6 million acres have burned in California, and many more acres throughout the Western United States. And so we're going to do everything we can there. And then third is our Public Land Renewable Energy Development Act, which would create a path for 25 gigawatts of new renewable energy, done in an environmentally responsible way, of course, on our public lands by 2025. All 3 of those provisions were included in this clean energy package that passed the House. And I was really happy that my provisions went through with significant bipartisan support. I think 60 or 70 Republicans joined in those provisions and supporting those provisions. Speaking of, I have to wish everybody a happy National Public Lands Day. Today is National Public Lands Day. And of course, at the end of July, we passed the Great American Outdoors Act, which provided permanent funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And we're very proud of that. And that has a great impact on our district, everywhere from Torrey Pines, Carlsbad State Beach, all the way up through South Orange County. The LWCF is really important. I'd like to turn now to one of the issues that's most important to me, that I think kind of is the overarching issue of our time, and that's the issue of campaign finance reform and getting the dark money out of our politics. The corrosive nature of big money and dark money in our politics, I think, is a key reason why we can't get more done when it comes to the big issues of our day that have overwhelming support from the public, whether it be climate change, whether it be gun violence prevention, or so much else. And there are a few leaders who are more pivotal to that effort to get the dark money out of politics than Tiffany MULLER from End Citizens United and Let America Vote. I'm really proud that she's here with us. And I've been proud to run my campaign since day one with no corporate PAC money. No corporate PAC money. So critically important, particularly at a time when many others, including my opponent, take money from oil company executives and all the rest. We've tried to do things the right way. I'm also very proud to be a founding member of something called the End Corruption Caucus that ECU and others have led on. It's a group of freshman members that have been leaders in taking on corruption in Washington, including helping pass the most comprehensive, sweeping effort in a generation called the For the People Act, H.R. 1. And this was so important. You think of our top priority in the 116th Congress, and it was to get the dark money out of politics, try to reduce the influence of big corporations in our politics, and to protect against foreign interference in our elections. Pretty important, don't you think, given everything that's happening these days? So it's all about the people being able to maintain political power. And when we introduced the For the People Act and we passed it in the House, Mitch McConnell said, this is a power grab. And in one sense, he was right. It was a power grab for the people. That's why we called it the For the People Act. So when we keep the House, when we take back the Senate, when we take back the White House in 38 days, we're going to pass the For the People Act. It's going to become the law of the land. So with that, it's my honor to welcome Tiffany MULLER, the president and executive director of End Citizens United and Let America Vote. Since joining ECU, Tiffany has helped grow the group from a startup into a nationwide organization with more than 4 million members and 500,000 grassroots donors. Since its founding in 2015, ECU has raised over $70 million with an average contribution of only $14. That's the key. And that's just during the last 2 election cycles. The group has elevated the issue of reform as a national priority and spearheaded the movement among candidates to forgo corporate PAC money. And last cycle, under Tiffany's leadership, ECU helped elect 58 new Democrats, including me, to the House of Representatives and paved the way for the introduction and House passage of what I just mentioned, H.R. 1, the For the People Act, the most comprehensive anti-corruption and reform legislation in a generation. Tiffany began her career in government and politics when she became the first openly gay public official in Kansas in 2004 as a member of the Topeka City Council, where she led successful efforts to expand anti-discrimination protections. She has been described as a force of nature and a high-quality leader who can grasp the responsibility to a larger cause. She received her undergraduate degree from Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas, and her master's from the University of Maryland. She sits on the board of Let America Vote and the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center. She's a diehard fan of the Kansas City Chiefs. We still get along despite that. We'll have to let that slide. And U.S. women's soccer. I'm absolutely with you on that. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her wife and their daughter. My friend, a force of nature, Tiffany, it is great to have you with us. Thanks for being here.
It's so good to be here with you, Congressman. Do you think that they meant that as a compliment when they said it?
Absolutely.
I think that could have gone either way, really.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to get back to your opening comments in just a minute. I also wanted to say how delighted I am to welcome back Dr. ANDREA LACROIX, truly a leading public health expert in our local community. a distinguished professor and chief of epidemiology in the Department of Family Medicine and Public Health at our very own UC San Diego. Go Tritons. She's also the director of the Women's Health Center of Excellence at UCSD, and she's an expert on long-term observational studies and randomized clinical trials to identify preventative interventions that improve our prospects for health aging. She received her doctoral degree in epidemiology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She puts up with me even though I went to Duke, so I'm grateful for that. She is also a force of nature, incidentally. And this is the 6th virtual town hall that Dr. LaCroix has participated in. I'm incredibly grateful for all the information that she has provided for our constituents. Welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
Well, very briefly, before we get to questions, I just wanted to kind of set where we are with regard to COVID-19. We try to do this every time we have one of these. And the numbers are daunting and they are tragic. 204,000 lives lost, over 7 million cases in the United States. In California, 804,000 cases, over 15,500 deaths. San Diego County, 46,000 cases, 775 deaths. Orange County, almost 53,000 cases and 1,200 deaths. On August 28th, as you probably know, Governor Newsom introduced the Blueprint for a Safer Economy, which revised the criteria for loosening and tightening restrictions on activities. Every county in California, including our San Diego and Orange counties, were assigned one of 4 colored tiers: purple, red, orange, and yellow, based on the prevalence of COVID and the extent of community spread. The color indicates which sectors can operate and at what capacity. In San Diego County and Orange County, we are rated as red or substantial by the governor's reopening plan, which places our district in the 2nd tier. And that keeps some non-essential businesses closed, others open with varying capacity. I would recommend, if you want a list of what this means for different business types and other relevant information, you can go to the new portal that the state has set up at covid19.ca.gov. Over the past week, San Diego County has reported an average of 285 new cases and 3 deaths per day. Many of the cases are linked to a specific outbreak at San Diego State University. The number of hospitalizations is steady, and there are now 196 patients with a confirmed case, a decrease from 2 weeks ago. Orange County, 180 new cases and 12 deaths per day over the past week on average. As is the case in San Diego County, the number of hospitalizations is steady. Now, 157 patients with a confirmed case, also a decrease from 14 days ago. And as always, I'm sure Dr. LaCroix will mention this many times, it's on us to try to get to a lower tier by following the public health guidance, wearing our masks. I have a great mask today, by the way. This is my California Bear Flag mask that I've been wearing around. There you go. So wear your mask, socially distance, try to prioritize outdoor venues, do all the things that we know after 7 months of this actually work, and we'll continue to be able to reopen safely. And that's what we all want to do. We all want a 5th COVID relief bill. The numbers are so daunting thinking about what's at stake. 1 in 4 children in the United States is food insecure right now. Millions and millions of families are at risk of eviction. Many small businesses continue to struggle. And we have to continue to advance support for lives, to protect livelihoods. And we passed the HEROES Act, as you all know, back in May 15th, over 4 months ago. And unfortunately, Mitch McConnell in the Senate went in May, June, July, August, and were too busy confirming judges rather than working with us in any kind of productive way to pass something. And I did not expect for McConnell and Steve Mnuchin and everybody else at the White House to agree word for word with everything in our bill. But I did expect them to come up with a counterproposal, a reasonable counterproposal, a lot earlier. And they still haven't, frankly. They've backtracked. McConnell came out with something called the HEALS Act. It was $1 trillion bill. Then they backtracked from that when he didn't have the votes among Senate Republicans. They came out with a $650 billion bill. But it's just completely inadequate for the challenges that we face, including most recently the challenges that our mayors discussed yesterday. The U.S. Conference of Mayors said that they desperately needed more funding. The Fed chairman, no Democrat, Jerome Powell said that we need to go big, that we have to inject this money into the economy now, despite the fact that we're all worried about the debt, deficits, etc. The pain of doing nothing exceeds the pain of weighing, when you weigh the lives and livelihoods lost. So we have to move forward, and we have to do everything we can to get that fifth bill across the finish line. In fact, I'm going back on Tuesday to hopefully do that, at least to introduce and to pass our last best offer. We have over 200,000 Americans dead, unspeakable tragedy. State and local budgets are collapsing, tens of millions out of work, and it's just unfathomable to me that we can't move a proposal forward. So with that, I now want to turn it back to really one of our great leaders in Washington, D.C., particularly on the issue of getting the dark money out of our politics. Tiffany Muller, End Citizens United, Let America Vote. So grateful that you're here. Thanks for joining us again.
I'm so grateful to be here, Congressman. And, as you were talking about those statistics, I just continue to think about that every one of those statistics is a family and an individual, and that the pain that they are feeling and not having it addressed actually does connect directly with this issue of money in politics, because it is about a government that's not being responsive to the people and what they need. And what we see instead is continued pressure to do what the biggest donors want or the biggest corporations need. We have people during a pandemic who are getting richer while millions and millions are out of work, and while hundreds of thousands are dying. This is unacceptable, and we have to create a better democracy. And that's what you and I fight for every single day. So it's a real honor to be here with you today.
Well, thank you, Tiffany. And we've got a bunch of questions from our viewers that they've submitted via email and also via social media in comments. But before we get into them, and many of them are medical in nature for Dr. LaCroix, I have some specific questions for you, Tiffany, because I know you're going to have to run. But first and foremost, a critical component of making sure our democracy truly reflects the will of the people is getting big money out of our politics. And I saw the influence of outside interests in our race, corporate donors. But can you talk about how we got to a place where our campaign finance system is so broken? Tiffany, can you hear us? Uh-oh. Tiffany, are you there?
Huh.
Well, Tiffany froze up. Hopefully she will unfreeze. This has been a bad week for Zoom, I have to say. Well, Doctor, while we're waiting for Tiffany to unfreeze, we've got plenty of questions from our viewers. Here's one from Lois in Vista, who says, I can't figure out what is happening at the CDC. I've always trusted their advice, but now I don't know if we can trust what they're publishing about the coronavirus.
Should we do this?
I think we got Tiffany back, by the way. So,
sorry about that. Go ahead.
Dr. LaCroix, answer that question about the CDC, and then we'll go back to Tiffany.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Lois for sending in that question, and say that on the bad days, I think that this administration is turning the CDC into the Center for Deceptive Communication. But there's no doubt that the political appointees at CDC, just the political appointees and some members of Trump's coronavirus task force, are forcing the dedicated public servants, public health champions at CDC to change, dilute, and outright violate what they know to be responsible communications about COVID-19. So, Lois, you are right to consider the messages, if they are not reasonable, if they don't make sense, to consider the severe pressure on the CDC to lie about what's safe and what's not safe, depending on how the White House wants to gaslight the public from week to week. This is exactly why Congressman Levin is holding these town halls, so that we can come together and consider the best information possible as we try to stay current on this pandemic and keep ourselves, families, and communities safe. So I will stop there. There's a lot more that could be said about that question, but I want to make sure Tiffany gets a chance to talk with us.
All right, I'm going to go. Thank you for that. I'm going to go back to Tiffany. I'm not sure how much of the question you heard, the first question, but the gist of it was, can you talk about how we got to a place where our campaign finance system is so broken?
That's a great question, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. I think I've done 60 of these since March, and that's the first time I've ever actually been kicked off during one. So, of course, it would happen tonight. Money in politics has always been a problem in our democracy. There's no doubt about it. And throughout our history, we have attempted to continue to push back against the access and the influence that big money donors have, right? In the Gilded Age, we saw literally the Copper Kings up in Montana buying Senate seats, and it led to the Tillman Act, which actually outlawed corporate money in our politics up until the Citizens United decision. So there's absolutely no doubt that it has long been a problem. However, it has exponentially exploded since the Citizens United decision. And for those who don't know, in January of 2010, the Supreme Court made what I consider one of the most disastrous decisions of our lifetime in the Citizens United decision. And it took two really terrible ideas and it merged them together. And it said money equals speech and corporations are people. And it put a for sale sign on our democracy. And it allowed for the unlimited and undisclosed money to flood into our elections. And what we've seen since then is, I'll just give a couple of quick numbers. In the 20 years prior to Citizens United, there was $750 million spent by outside special interest groups to impact our elections. No doubt about it, $750 million is a lot of money. However, in the 10 years since the decision, we've seen $4.5 billion of outside special interest money. And only half of that is even disclosed, which means we've had over $2 billion flooding into our elections that we don't even know where it's coming from. And what we see is that Senator McConnell and other politicians continue to rig the system in favor, and the courts, in favor of their corporate special interest donors, and in favor of continuing to drown out the people's voices. Whether it's through big money buying seats or voter suppression, this comes down to who gets to have a voice and a vote in our democracy. And right now that system is stacked against the people. And that is awful. And we see how it plays out in our policy impact every single day. And Congressman, you talked about this earlier, whether it's climate change or gun violence or lowering prescription drug prices. What we see is that there's inaction and dysfunction in Washington because of the sheer amount of money. And so that is what we're fighting to change every single day. And it starts with sending amazing leaders like Congressman Mike Levin back to Congress where we need him, because his voice is so vitally important in this effort.
Thank you, Tiffany, very much. Obviously, among all the other issues with this Supreme Court nominee, and I hope it'll be discussed during her confirmation, is her position on campaign finance, or her position on the Citizens United decision. But unfortunately, I don't think she's going to be on our side, I have a feeling. But that'll all be discussed, I'm sure, in the coming weeks during the Senate confirmation. Another one for you. We talked a bit about H.R. 1, the For the People Act, incredible sweeping anti-corruption, voting rights, and ethics reform, really the biggest since Watergate. And we passed it. I've seen how important it is that we get the big money out of politics. I've experienced this myself and try to restore our democracy to the people. But could you share more about the main priorities captured in H.R. 1? And there's misinformation about H.R. 1 as well. Perhaps you want to address some of that, why this is so important, what the major components are.
Yeah, and you started off with that Mitch McConnell called this a power grab. And he's right, but it's all about giving power back to the people. And so H.R. 1 does 4 really simple things. First, it makes it easier, not harder to vote, because people shouldn't have to run an obstacle course in order to vote. So it does automatic voter registration, which would actually put 50 million new voters on our rolls. It expands early in-person voting. It makes it easier to vote by mail. Actually, all of the things that we are currently talking about in a pandemic to make it safer for people to vote during a pandemic were already addressed in HR 1. And if HR 1 had passed and been signed into law, we would have had the infrastructure in place to actually be able to make sure that people weren't making a choice in November between their health and their right to vote. So that's number one. Number two, it ends gerrymandering. Because look, no, it should not be that politicians are choosing their voters rather than voters choosing their elected officials. So it would set up independent redistricting commissions across the country and end and eliminate gerrymandering. Number three, it tightens up ethics reform. So everything from strengthening the Office of Governmental Ethics to saying that members of Congress can't serve on for-profit corporate boards, which just seems like common sense, to that we can't use taxpayer money to settle sexual harassment claims, to, I don't know, how about the presidential candidates should actually have to disclose their tax returns. So there is a whole lot of ethical pieces that just puts some things that have been norms into law and strengthen some places where we have seen corruption enter the system. And then fourth, it begins to end the dominance of big money in politics. And the two biggest pieces of this are around disclosure and transparency. It actually would make it to where any money spent in our elections were fully disclosed and transparent as to the source of those funds. And that's huge because we've seen money coming in from foreign governments, from foreign nationals. We've seen money coming in that's hidden behind multiple shell companies. So this stops that. It holds accountable who is originally funding those sources of funds. It also closes loopholes between the revolving door of lobbyists and government. And it incentivizes folks to raise money from small dollar donors rather than big donors. So that's what it does. They're all, when you go talk to people across the country, this isn't a Democratic bill or a Republican bill or an independent bill. Voters across the spectrum want less money in politics, more disclosure and transparency, more cleaning up the corruption that's in our system. So we know that this bill is really popular with the people, but perhaps not surprising, it tends to turn into a partisan fight on Capitol Hill because frankly, right now, there's one party trying to protect a rigged status quo and one party trying to change it and give power back to the people. So I was super proud to be a part of the push to get HR 1 signed into law. And Congressman Levin and his classmates brought in momentum to get that done because they had run on this issue. They had campaigned on it. They knew how powerful it was with the people and had even started demanding that we should do comprehensive democracy reform even before they were elected because they understood how powerful it was. So again, Congressman, thank you so much for your leadership.
Well, thank you for your leadership, Tiffany. And just as it was our first priority in the 116th Congress, I hope it remains as such in the 117th Congress. I know we're going to strongly advocate for that if we have the opportunity. And obviously, there's an election in 38 days. So first we have to win, and we're taking nothing for granted. HR 1 also centers on protecting and expanding access to the ballot. That means expanding vote by mail, been in the news a little bit lately. And as we look toward November, it's more important than ever that all Americans can vote by mail so that no one has to choose between their health and their vote. Could you talk, Tiffany, about the work that End Citizens United and Let America Vote is doing to advance voting rights as well as the voting rights provisions in HR 1?
Yeah, absolutely. For those that don't know, End Citizens United and Let America Vote merged earlier this year because we understand that very often the same people who are trying to buy an election are the same ones who are trying to suppress the vote. And these problems are linked, and so our solutions really must be linked as well. And what we've seen in this country is that since the 2013 Shelby Supreme Court decision that really gutted the Voting Rights Act, we've seen voting rights going in a really dangerous, wrong direction in this country. And so Let America Vote was founded to make sure that we were fighting back against those voter suppressive efforts and to give everyone the equal right to vote. And so we're fighting back against proposals across the country that make it harder for eligible voters to cast a ballot, whether it's voter ID requirements, voter purges from the rolls, voter intimidation, difficult registration processes, anything that makes voting harder. And so just a couple of months ago, we launched the Save the Vote campaign, which is made up of a couple of dozen membership organizations across the country to help push back against the unprecedented attacks and disinformation that we're seeing. We've really never seen anything like it coming out of an administration. And so we are trying to do rapid response. We're trying to just be another voice out there, amplifying and pushing back against the disinformation that we're seeing. And we're also trying to make sure that voters who might be confused by all the changes they're hearing about and by the attacks understand how to safely cast their ballot in November and what they need to do. So, and then of course we are pushing every single day to pass HR 1 and HR 4, the aptly named John Lewis Voting Rights Act, into law, because those two pieces are critical to expanding voter rights in this country. And so, as you said, Mitch McConnell is continuing to block them now, but we look forward to helping him get a new job come January and to making sure that we can pass it and get it signed into law next congressional session.
At least a demotion would be fine. That would be
exactly.
That would be
exactly.
Good. In primaries throughout the country, such as in Georgia and in Mitch McConnell's state of Kentucky, we've seen states close polling places, specifically in communities of color. Could you talk about how restrictions on voting rights so often disproportionately impact already vulnerable communities?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there is any secret that so much of the voter suppression that we see is racist in nature and specifically aimed at communities of color to keep their voice from being heard. And so in the Shelby decision that I talked about a minute ago, the Supreme Court gutted this piece of the Voting Rights Act called pre-clearance, which applied to areas that had previously had discriminatory voting rights laws. They had to, before they could make any election changes, they had to go to the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice had to sign off on any changes that they wanted. Well, the Supreme Court said, well, that's working, so it's clearly no longer needed. To which Justice Ginsburg said, that's like saying that you're dry because you have an umbrella in a rainstorm and you suddenly say you don't need the umbrella anymore. And because they took that part out, what we've seen is states and jurisdictions that were previously covered under the Pre-Clearance Act for the Voting Rights Act do things like, for instance, polling location closures. We've seen 1,700 polling locations close since the Voting Rights Act was gutted. And what that means, we saw it in Georgia, right? We see these lines that are 8, 10, 12 hours long. And, you know, they have shown that even 15 minutes of waiting to vote is suppressive to that vote. So this is about this is coordinated. This is about big money and corporate interest and those who don't want communities of color to be heard, making it harder to vote, harder for their voices to be heard, and trying to make them jump through as many hoops as possible to cast their ballot. So we're fighting back every single day against that, but it is absolutely a coordinated attack on those communities.
Well, Tiffany, I know you need to go, and want to thank you again so much for all your work. Your efforts are more needed now than ever, particularly over the next month or two here. And I just sincerely thank you, and wanted to see if you had any closing thoughts before you have to sign off.
Well, first, thank you again for having me this evening. It has been such a pleasure, and I always love talking about these issues. And so I'm sorry I have another engagement that I have to jump off for. But before I go, I want everyone to know we have 38 days until the election, and we have all heard in our life that this is the most important election of our lifetime. That has never been more true than it is right now. We know what stakes are on the line. everything from our civil rights to healthcare to creating a democracy that is more fair, more just, more equitable. And that it starts with who we send to Washington. And so for everybody watching, we have 38 days to make sure that we get Congressman Mike Levin reelected. There could not be a clearer contrast between him and his opponent about where they stand on these issues. And so, Congressman, I just want to say thank you for your leadership. We are here with you. And I think that you should remind the viewers of your website so that they can go on and look. $5, $10, $15, every little bit helps. And if you can sign up to talk to voters, campaigning in a pandemic is really, really hard. And I know the congressman could use help reaching out, talking to voters, making sure everyone has a plan to vote. And the last thing I would say is vote. Please vote.
Yes.
Make sure you have a plan to vote. Make sure your family and friends have a plan to vote, because we must all speak up with the loudest voice possible this time.
Well, it's MikeLevin.org.
There we go.
That's easy. How do they follow? I think you have one of the best Twitter handles around for ECU. How do they follow ECU?
At Stop Big Money. At
Isn't that
Stop
great?
Big Money. It's great. Yes.
That's fantastic.
Get involved.
That is fantastic. Well, with your help, that's exactly what's going to happen. And Tiffany, I look forward to working with you for a long time to come. Thank you for all that you do, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Take care.
All right. You too. So we've got a bunch more questions. We'll get to as many as we can. Next is Linus in Orange County, who asks, what steps are you taking to ensure there'll be enough polling places open so people don't get discouraged after waiting for hours in line? Also, how are states ensuring the integrity of cast ballots in battleground state servers? It's common knowledge the Russians broke into recorded ballots servers. So let me unpack this a bit. With regard to Orange and San Diego counties, I feel really good about where we are. Both the registrars have, I think, laid out a comprehensive strategy of how to make sure that everyone who is legally eligible to vote can cast their ballot, and give them flexibility and options to be able to do so safely in a manner consistent with their desire. They can go to the polling places. There's going to be polling places, super polling places, they call them in San Diego, vote centers in Orange County. Those are going to be open in the days leading up to the election. In Orange County, it's going to be the October 30th through November 3rd. In San Diego County, it's going to be October 31st through November 3rd. You can go to our website at MikeLevin.org, where we've got a link where it tells you all of the information about that. In addition, there are going to be drop-off locations. San Diego posted its list. There's probably 20 or 30 drop-off locations throughout North County, San Diego, a lot of libraries, places that we're used to. Those are going to be open starting on October the 6th. And in Orange County, you're going to have a bunch of drop-off boxes that are secure throughout South OC. You'll be able to see a map or a list of those on our website that'll link through to the registrars in the respective counties. With regard to battleground states and the servers, it's something that I am concerned about. Without getting too much into classified briefings that we've had, I can tell you that the Director of National Intelligence and others have talked about interference. There's no question that Russia is continuing to try to interfere, that they did successfully get into at least a couple of servers in the 2016 election, although there's no evidence that they actually changed vote totals, but they inserted malware and they could have wreaked havoc on the vote count potentially, although there's no evidence that that was done. Something that we have to be mindful of. That's why sometimes less technology is better. A paper trail is better, but we have to be very mindful. Also, of a lot of this disinformation being propagated by Russia and other states as well. There's been discussion about China and Iran and North Korea, but really Russia head and shoulders more significant in terms of their capacity and in terms of their frankly, their desire to keep Donald Trump in office and prevent Joe Biden from becoming president. Those are simply the facts. So just be mindful, be vigilant. and everybody exercise your democratic right to vote. Next question is for Dr. LaCroix, also from, no, excuse me, we asked this one. I'll move on to another one for you, Doctor. This is from Laura in San Clemente. Both Trump and a pharmaceutical executive have said it's possible that a coronavirus vaccine will be available before the election. Also, the CDC has notified public health officials to prepare to distribute the vaccine to high-risk groups as soon as late October or early November. If that happens and you were in a high-risk group, would you get the vaccine?
Well, thank you, Laura, for asking such a clear-cut question. And because you asked such a clear-cut question, you deserve a clear-cut answer, and I'm going to give you one. The long story short is no, I will not get a vaccine that's released in October or early November, because I don't believe that time frame is adequate for ensuring that any vaccine is safe and effective. Vaccine development must be a careful process and followed through to a careful conclusion. You will hear much from the public health community immediately if a vaccine is released without adequate testing to ensure that it's safe and effective. Many Americans are concerned about political meddling in the vaccine development process and the approval for emergency use of an unproven vaccine simply for the purpose of increasing the votes for Donald Trump. Several drug companies have come together to sign an agreement that they will not release a vaccine until it's ready. They have a lot at stake because if those vaccines hurt people, there are going to be a lot of lawyers suing them for big money. That I think is one protection for us. We are one of the most litigious countries in the world, and so the drug companies know that they'll have to pay if they hurt us. I'll read you just one little quote from the New England Journal on September 23rd. Public confidence in vaccination is fragile. COVID-19 vaccination programs will succeed only if there is widespread belief that available vaccines are safe and effective, and that policies for prioritizing their distribution are equitable and evidence-based. Trust in science and expertise are threatened, as the pandemic has shown, with catastrophic results. Relying on nonpartisan government scientists, including those at the CDC, who I do trust, their expert advisors, and the transparent science-based processes that have served U.S. vaccination-related activities exceedingly well for generations, would provide the best chance for COVID-19 vaccines to realize the high hopes for their role in addressing the current public health crisis.
Thank you for that. Nick in Solana Beach asks, I just read that Speaker Pelosi and Mnuchin have agreed to resume talks on a new economic relief package. Why are they negotiating and not Pelosi and Mitch McConnell? And if the Senate isn't involved, why bother talking with Mnuchin? Well, I have wondered that myself, Nick. And the other one who's missing from the negotiations are the guy that at least had his name associated with The Art of the Deal. Although I don't know if he actually wrote that book, but the president has not been at the negotiating table either. Moreover, Mark Meadows, the new White House chief of staff, I mean, this is a guy in the Congress who had a reputation where he wouldn't take yes for an answer. He is not known as a deal maker. He's known as a deal breaker. And I think he has played a detrimental role in all of this. Remember, from the beginning of March through the end of April, we passed 4 big bills on COVID. March 6th, $8 billion for the vaccine. Middle of March, we did the Families First Act, $200 billion. End of March, CARES Act, $2.2 trillion. End of April, the plus up for the Paycheck Protection Program and for hospitals, and that was about $500 billion. So all of those were done with bipartisan effort. The House and Senate would release its version. The other side would release a counteroffer. They'd go back and forth, and then there'd be a conference, a negotiation, and then eventually a bill that would benefit people in the country. And that's how it's supposed to work. And that's how it did work. The difference, I think, is that Mick Mulvaney was the White House chief of staff when all that happened. Since Meadows has been around, we can't seem to get anything done. And again, middle of May is when we passed the HEROES Act in the House. May, June, July, August go by, and they did nothing in the Senate. They confirmed judges. That's about it. They didn't do anything on COVID, and they didn't work with the administration, and they didn't have a plan. But if it's just Pelosi and Mnuchin that are negotiating, I think we could get a deal done. The problem seems to be is Mark Meadows. But I think at the end of the day, it's really on the president. If the president wants a package to help people right now in this time of crisis, he can make it happen. He can make it happen. And I think McConnell and the Senate will come along. If they just allow a vote, we can get there. With the Democrats and with a handful of the Republicans to go along, we can get there. And I'll be going back, as I said, on Tuesday, hopefully to push forward that last best offer from the House Democrats in hope that it will yield a positive outcome and a fifth COVID relief bill. Thank you for that question. Mira in Carlsbad asks, I was with a friend last week who just tested positive for COVID. It made me wonder about how long it takes between getting infected with the virus and when being positive would show up on a COVID test. Interesting question.
Very interesting. Definitely part of our lives. And Mira, I just want to answer to begin with a story that came up in my life this week. I was meeting with my postdoctoral and predoctoral fellows, and one of the pre-docs told me a story, true story, about 4 friends of hers that were aching to get together. They missed each other so much. They all 4 got tests. They got together for a day, spent some time inside together, spent some time outside together, and about 3/4 of the way through their time together, one of them got a sore throat. They'd all tested negative. A little while later, all 4 of them had COVID, and one is in the hospital. So what happened? I mean, why couldn't they all 4 get tested and come together and socialize safely? Well, the PCR tests, which we think are the most accurate, it's become clear that the possibility of false negative tests is actually quite large, particularly in the time between when infection occurs and when symptoms starts. And of course, if the infected person never develops symptoms, then it's impossible to know when they're most infectious and when they were most likely to test positive. That's why a test is no guarantee if it comes back negative that you have not been infected. And it's why public health measures like quarantining and wearing masks need to continue. And if you've been exposed, you'll need to not only get tested, but remain quarantined for some period of time, just to be sure. So I previously came, Mike, to this town hall and talked about a study that gave some clarity. It was looked at all the information from 7 studies evaluating the accuracy of PCR viral tests, and the results showed that over the 4 days between when a person's infected and the onset of symptoms, the probability of a false negative result in that infected person decreases from 100% on day 1. So the day they're first infected, that test will 100% come back as negative, to 67% on day 4. So still on day 4, they can have a 67% chance of a negative test. On the day of symptom onset, which is not the day the 4 young people were tested, the median false negative rate was 38%, and this decreased to 20% on day 8 of infection, and then began to increase again from 21% on day 9 to 66% on day 21. So you can imagine that, this period from like day 5 to day 8 of when you're infected is when you're most likely to test positive. And if you happen to get tested before or after that, you have a pretty decent chance of testing negative, even though you're infected. And it just has to do with how much virus you're shedding on particular days. You can still infect people. You may not have enough virus shedding in the nasopharynx to test positive.
Wow, so pretty high rates of false positives there. False negatives, I should say. Wow, interesting. Carla in Dana Point asks, can you talk about the recent shooting of a homeless Black man in San Clemente by an Orange County sheriff this past week? Well, certainly I can, Carla. This was a tragic, tragic situation. I found out about it almost maybe an hour after it occurred the other day. And I had a conversation shortly thereafter with Sheriff Don Barnes, Orange County Sheriff. And you know, I think one of the huge problems is that the police officers, the sheriffs, were not wearing body cams. Orange County does not have body cams for their officers, because we would have seen, I think, with a lot more clarity exactly what occurred. The situation, as the sheriff and as a witness explained it, was that the homeless African-American gentleman got into a verbal altercation. We also saw that on the video from the witness that was there, the cell phone video that was taken. The question that really is most important is whether or not the gentleman that was killed got possession of the sheriff's gun. According to the sheriff, he said multiple occasions, he's got my gun, he's got my gun. And then that led to the tragic shooting of that gentleman. And it's difficult to tell exactly whether or not that happened from the video that we've seen, because of the quality of the video and the way it was taken. It's an awful, awful situation. We need a full investigation of this. You know, the governor has a bill on his desk that would put an investigation like this in the hands of the Attorney General. So that's something that I think is notable. The other thing is, I'm going to do everything I can to help Orange County get those body cams, because it's unacceptable that they don't have them. And we would know a whole lot more about what happened if those body cams were in place. Obviously, very, very difficult situation for all involved. We have to get all the facts. And the other thing I'll mention is that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that we passed now a couple months ago in the House would require the body cams, as it would require many other things as well. But that's the biggest disconnect, is the body cams, to know exactly what happened. But a terrible tragedy for the community. And obviously my heart and my thoughts are with everybody in the community during this difficult time. Here's a question for you, Doctor. This is from Dylan in Oceanside. Dylan says, I read an article about a Canadian study which showed that smoking marijuana could reduce your chances of catching the coronavirus. Have there been any follow-up studies to confirm that? I haven't heard this one.
Oh, those Canadians. Well, it's probably the study that Dylan is referring to. It's really a convoluted story. So let me just hit on a couple high points. This study, which is not peer-reviewed and not published, showed that CBD, which most of you know is one of the chemical compounds found in marijuana, but that doesn't cause intoxication, might be able to prevent infection by blocking the expression of something called ACE2 receptors. And these receptors are found in cells in the lungs and other parts of the body that are the target of SARS-CoV-2 virus. The virus attaches to those receptors and then enters the cells to cause infection. And several drugs are actually being evaluated that either block the virus from these receptors, reduce the number of receptors on the cell, or prevent the virus from entering the cell after it attaches to the ACE2 receptors. Some older drugs like hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin were evaluated for this purpose, but so far we haven't seen a drug that blocks the expression of ACE2 receptors shown to be effective. So the Canadian study did not test this. They didn't provide any evidence that cannabis is beneficial. It's more like a hypothesis. And instead, it recommends testing various strains of cannabis to see if any can do this. ACE2 modulation is actually still unproven as a treatment target for COVID-19. One thing we can tell you right now, though, is that smoking or vaping any product is damaging to the lungs. And there is emerging evidence that smoking or vaping increases the severity of COVID-19 infection if you're infected.
Interesting. Zach in San Clemente asks, I regularly hear about people leaving the state due to increasing business regulations and taxes. As a young professional with aspirations to own a business, this is highly concerning for my future dreams. Do you have any influence here? Is there anything that can be done to turn this trend around? Well, Zach, thank you for that excellent question. You know, first of all, I'm focused on getting another COVID-19 relief bill across the finish line. and specifically trying to help out small businesses, many of whom were just impacted so negatively by all of this. And, you know, we did do the Paycheck Protection Program, $670 billion. There were over 20,000 small businesses in the 49th District that received PPP loans. That equated to $613 million in federal assistance through the PPP program, just through our district alone. But before the pandemic, I had several pieces of legislation to help small businesses that I thought I would highlight. And of course, a lot of our region is so dependent on tourism, you know, and trade is another huge issue. So we passed the United States-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement. I was very proud to help work on that and to help make that a reality that would help our region with the money for the EPA for the Tijuana River Valley cleanup. But a few of the other bills, the Brand USA Extension Act, which would reauthorize Brand USA public-private partnership and help countless jobs in small businesses in Southern California that depend on tourism. The Investing in Main Street Act, which would increase the percentage that a bank can invest in small business investment companies. That bill passed the House. The Expanding Contracting Opportunities for Small Business Act, which would give small businesses more opportunities to compete for federal contracts. That also passed the House. And the Small Business Development Centers Improvement Act, which would reauthorize the SBDC program through fiscal year 2023 and would ensure that the SBDC centers can raise their own funds and allow centers to market their services to small businesses. And we've got great relationships with our local SBDC in San Diego. And that bill passed the House as well. So those are just a few of the things. But I really do appreciate the question to the extent that the federal government has the role to help small business. We're going to continue to do that in every way that we can. Here's a question for you, Dr. LaCroix. It's from Jamie in Rancho Santa Fe. It's been reported that COVID vaccine approvals need to go through the White House. Please tell me that I haven't lost what's left of my mind.
Well, I'm right there with you, Jamie. Right there with you. The minute that the White House overrules an FDA decision on whether or not to approve a vaccine, you know we've got big trouble. Francis Collins, who's the director of the NIH, was actually asked this very same question on the Situation Room by Wolf Blitzer, which is, you know, does the vaccine approval have to go through the White House? And Dr. Collins answered, I'm not a lawyer or a constitutional scholar. I don't know the answer to that question. Can the president force the FDA to bend to the will of the White House? Two former FDA commissioners previously told CNN that while they think it's very unlikely that Trump could pressure scientists into authorizing or approving a COVID-19 vaccine, it is possible. And the Department of Health and Human Services has in the past overruled the FDA's recommendations on medications, likely for the wrong reasons. So I just want to repeat what I said earlier, which is that if a vaccine is approved in October or November, before or after this election, I will not take it, because I do not believe that time frame is adequate for ensuring that any vaccine is safe and effective.
Well, I'll be asking people like you, Doctor, when the vaccine comes out, whether or not it's ready to take. I can tell you that. I'll be listening to you and Dr. Garfien, Dr. Fauci, people that actually have studied and understand the science. Here's a question. This is a tough question from Mr. Allen in Del Mar. When are you going to start supporting common sense legislation that represents the safety and security of your legal constituents instead of following the dictates of your political party? Well, Mr. Allen, I think you may have gotten some misinformation about my record on immigration. I think it's probably important that I give you some background. My mom's parents came from Mexico when they were very young. My mom likes to refer to them as the dreamers of their day. They came to this country. My grandpa was 12. My grandma was 3. They came through Texas, eventually made their way to California, started a small business renting jukeboxes in downtown Los Angeles. And did well with it and sent all 5 of their daughters to college. My mom was the first to get an advanced degree in the family. My grandparents didn't graduate from high school. And unfortunately, they're no longer alive. I think it was pretty interesting that their youngest grandson wound up going to Washington in the House of Representatives. But I think often about what enabled my grandparents to achieve that dream, that truly American dream. And I wonder whether that dream would be possible today. And because of that, I sponsored and strongly support things like the Dream and Promise Act that would lead our dreamers towards a path where they, in my mind, represent everything that's right with America. Many are coming to the United States when they're extremely young. They know of no other country but the United States. And they're productive, they're working, they're studying, they're really the best of what we should be proud of from young people. And I know many of them personally myself. The other thing I'll mention is that we want comprehensive bipartisan immigration reform. The members themselves want comprehensive bipartisan immigration reform. And it's a big disappointment, I think, to us all that it seems like there are those, frankly, with both political parties that would rather have the issue of immigration rather than trying to solve the real challenges of immigration. I do not think that our time and money are well spent on the president's wall, the vanity project that it's been. I think they recognize, Kushner and others have recognized how difficult it is to build, and also to the extent they have built wall, it has been areas that already have fencing, and they're doing what they can, I think, to take political credit. But I've been down to the border. I've been to the detention facilities. I've been to our points of entry. And, look, the part that I think people miss is that building a wall in between the ports of entry is not a wise decision. We need to strengthen the ports of entry themselves. We need to, there are 328 of them, and we need to make sure that they have technology, that they have personnel. And then to the extent we can do things virtually rather than creating actual physical fencing, we can do things better and cheaper, frankly, than what's being proposed in many cases by the administration. So I have tried to focus and listen to the folks down at the border. The other thing, I have tried to fight against policies that I think are inhumane. I think you can have security and humanity at the same time. In fact, I would insist that we do. Human rights matter. When you separate a child from their parent, that's unconscionable. My wife and I, we have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. When I went down to the Otay Mesa detention facility and other detention facilities, and I saw children being separated from their parents in the United States of America, that's something I never want to see. The false narrative that it's somehow a deterrent and it's a good thing to separate children. I mean, who are we as people that we would be so inhumane? So I want to see security, but I also want to see humanity. And that's what guides me. Those are the values that guide me. And I hope the values that guide most people when it comes to immigration policy. But I thank you for the question, Mr. Allen. Here's one for you, Doctor. This is from John in La Jolla. Is anyone collecting statistics on the number of people who have survived the coronavirus but who have long-term problems?
Great question, John. And I'd like to give you a very clear answer. The short answer is yes. I actually gave one of my doctoral students for her qualifying exam, which I have to read tomorrow, a question projecting 10 years into the future to see how she would design a study to determine if a previous COVID infection had influenced the rate of getting sick with multiple diseases or accelerated the aging process. Those are all questions that we'll need to be answering in the future. But right now, here's what we know. The list of lingering maladies from COVID-19 becomes longer and longer as more and more people survive the disease. And the ongoing problems that people are reporting include fatigue, a racing heartbeat, shortness of breath, achy joints, mental fogging, a persistent loss of taste and smell, and then of course damage to the heart, lungs, kidneys, and brain that seem to be going on for a long time. Thus, it's not just the flu getting this virus, and it may affect us the rest of our lives. But since the COVID epidemic is still so young, no one knows how far into the future these symptoms will go on, what other ones might emerge, and whether or not COVID-19 will prompt the onset of big chronic diseases. But I'm so excited to tell you something that's happening right now. And that is this. There's a new research consortium that's inviting doctors, researchers, patients, and the general public, in other words, all of us, to submit questions that can be answered using a COVID-19 patient record database from more than 200 participating hospitals via a new web portal called COVID-19questions.org. This consortium is sort of a virtual data warehouse called the Reliable Response Data Discovery Consortium, and they abbreviate it R2D2, which is kind of fun, led by our informatics team at UC San Diego Health, which is also exciting, and made possible by seed funding from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. R2D2 comprises 12 health systems that includes 202 hospitals, including UC San Diego Health and the Veterans Affairs VA healthcare system. And so what they do is they have this virtual data warehouse. You can submit a question, and this data set has currently more than 45 million patients, including more than 59,000 who tested positive for COVID-19 and 29,000 who were hospitalized with the infection. You can send in your question and their team will answer that question from this humongous data set for free. Among the questions that have already been asked and answered, I just want to give you an idea of what people are sending in. Among adults hospitalized with COVID-19 and a history of hypertension, what is the mortality rate for those who received antihypertensive medications? Many adult COVID-19 patients who were hospitalized did not get admitted to the intensive care unit and were discharged alive. Of those, how many returned to the hospital within a week? So that just gives you a flavor for the kinds of, maybe you're worried that if you have a certain underlying condition, what are your chances of landing in the hospital or landing in the ICU? That's the kind of question you can ask. So the website again is COVID-19questions.org. It's a fantastic resource. It's available to all of us, and I encourage you to use it.
Very cool. COVID-19questions.org. I will check it out. Judy in San Clemente asks, I'm wondering if HR 6657 has any possibility, since it rescinds many appropriations approved for COVID relief. In particular, I would love to see the $88 million designated for Peace Corps volunteers. As you know, all 7,500 of them were evacuated with about 1 day notice from all around the world. I understand John Garamendi, an ex-Peace Corps volunteer like me, has sponsored some bills to assist Peace Corps volunteers with healthcare, employment, and job opportunities in COVID assistance. Have you worked with him on this? I have. First of all, the bill that you mentioned, 6657, I don't think is going to see the light of day. It's got about 10 Republicans. It doesn't have any Democrats on it. I don't think it's going to move. But the Peace Corps bill that John Garamendi is working on, HR 3456, called the Peace Corps Reauthorization Act, $450 million in yearly funding for the Peace Corps to better support their current and former volunteers. I'm a co-sponsor. It is a bipartisan bill, and I think it has a great chance. So we have to keep pushing forward for it. And thank you for your work as a Peace Corps volunteer. Appreciate it very much. Here's one for you, Doctor, from Alberto in San Juan Capistrano. What's the current science on COVID-19 reinfections?
And, you know, it's so important. I just want to say to Alberto to keep asking these questions because the evidence is changing all the time. And the most The short answer to this one is that COVID-19 reinfections we now know do occur, but so far they remain rare. And let me just say that the latest information on this that I'm aware of was published by a news report on September 21st, a few days ago. Another case of reinfection after recovery from COVID-19 was reported in a healthy young military healthcare provider at the U.S. Department of Defense Hospital in Virginia. He was infected by a patient in March. He recovered within 10 days and returned to excellent health, his doctors reported. And 51 days later, he was reinfected by a household member. So they tested the virus that occurred in him in both infections, and they were found to be slightly different strains of the virus. So clearly that means that we're not permanently immune from COVID if we're infected once. So far, there haven't been very many reinfections. It also may be the case that the virus is mutating enough that this will be more eventually like the flu or like like the cold, common colds, the coronavirus. It's just not as serious as this, that we'll have to constantly be on guard about reinfection from corona as well as a first infection. So I think it's sobering. I don't think we should worry too much more about multiple infections. I think what it means is if you've recovered from a COVID infection, you're not immune. You still need to practice public health measures. You still need to wear a mask and physically distance, get tested if you're exposed, and quarantine if you're exposed. So that's what's going on with COVID reinfection.
Well, thank you, Doctor, for your excellent answers to all these questions. I want to thank everybody for sending them to us. I want to thank the amazing Ellen Montanari, as always, for sorting through them and preparing us for them. I hope that this was informative and that you learned a lot. I wanted to turn it over to you, Doctor, to see if you had any closing thoughts this week.
I do. I'm a student of what's going on in our world and the intersectionality of COVID-19 infection with so many of the other problems that our country faces. So there was an editorial in The Lancet this week, and if I could read a couple quotes for that, I think my friends in the community that listen to your broadcast might get something out of this. It's called COVID-19 is Not a Pandemic, and you can read it in The Lancet from September 26th. As the world approaches 1 million deaths from COVID-19, we must confront the fact that we are taking a far too narrow approach to managing this outbreak of a new coronavirus. We have viewed the cause of this crisis as an infectious disease. All of our interventions have focused on cutting lines of viral transmission, thereby controlling the spread of the pathogen. The science that has guided governments has been driven mostly by epidemic modelers and infectious disease specialists who understandably frame the present health emergency in centuries-old terms of plague. But what we have learned so far tells us that the story of COVID-19 is not so simple. Two categories of disease are interacting within specific populations: infection with severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus and an array of non-communicable diseases. These conditions are clustering within social groups according to patterns of inequality deeply embedded in our society. The aggregation of these diseases on a background of social and economic disparity exacerbates the adverse effects of each separate disease. COVID-19 is not a pandemic, it is a syndemic. The syndemic nature of the threat we face means that a more nuanced approach is needed if we are to protect the health of our communities. And just one more or two more lines. The most important consequence of seeing COVID-19 as a syndemic is to underline its social origins. The vulnerability of older citizens, Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities, and key workers who are commonly poorly paid with fewer welfare protections points to a truth so far barely acknowledged, namely that no matter how effective a treatment or a protective vaccine is, the pursuit of a purely biomedical solution to COVID-19 will fail. Unless governments devise policies and programs to reverse profound disparities, our societies will never be truly COVID-19 secure. And that's how I would like to sign off today.
Well, thank you so much for that, Doctor. I appreciate it very much. Wanted to just give everybody heads up with some upcoming dates. Our next campaign town hall will be on October the 10th. We have 3 debates coming up with our opponent on October 5th, October 7th, October 9th. They're going to be hosted by the Voice of Orange County, the League of Women Voters, and the Voice of San Diego. I want to, as always, thank my family, my wonderful wife, our great kids, my parents, my in-laws who watch many of these from Arizona. Love you all and thank you all. And once again, can't stress it enough. Follow the public health guidelines. Let's keep each other safe and keep each other healthy. And I thought I would close with a quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. Thank you.